Have you ever wondered how an empire is born? Is it forged in fire or built, piece by piece, from the ground up? For Rome, the answer is written in stone. Long before the marble and the glory, there was only stone and a vision. Welcome to our journey into the heart of the Roman Empire, where we'll uncover how a small, unremarkable settlement became the center of the ancient world. Our story begins not with emperors and legions, but with the very land itself. Picture the Italian peninsula, a boot kicking into the Mediterranean Sea, right in its heart. A cluster of 7 hills rises from the banks of a winding river, the Tiber. This wasn't just a random spot on the map. This was a place of immense strategic advantage. The hills provided natural defenses, a high ground from which to watch for approaching enemies. They were steep enough to be a challenge for any attacker, yet close enough to form a single, cohesive community. The valleys between them were marshy, but they could be drained, creating fertile ground for farming. And then there was the Tiber River. This was Rome's lifeline. It connected the fledgling settlement to the sea, opening up vital trade routes. But the city was built far enough inland to be safe from coastal raids and pirates. The river also provided fresh water, a crucial resource for a growing population. It was at a key crossing point, a natural hub for trade and travel up and down the Italian peninsula. So, you see, Rome's destiny wasn't an accident. It was shaped by its geography. This unique combination of defensible hills, a navigable river, and a central location created the perfect incubator for an empire. Legend tells us the city was founded in 753 BC by the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, descendants of a Trojan hero and nursed by a Shiva. While this is a powerful myth, the reality, according to archaeology, is a bit more gradual. The earliest settlements on these hills were simple collections of mud and wattle huts. Different tribes, Latins and Sabines, lived here, sometimes clashing, sometimes cooperating. Over time, these small villages began to merge. They drained the central marshy valley between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, and this new, dry land became a common meeting place. It would eventually become the Roman Forum, the very heart of the city's political, social, and commercial life. This was the first great act of Roman engineering, not building an aqueduct or a Colosseum, but conquering the land itself. By turning a swamp into a city center, they laid the foundation for everything that followed. This early period was ruled by kings, 7 of them, according to tradition, starting with the legendary Romulus. These kings weren't all Roman. Some were Sabine, others were Etruscan. From the powerful civilization to the north, this tells us that early Rome was a melting pot, absorbing people and ideas from its neighbors. The Etruscans, in particular, had a huge influence. They brought advanced engineering, like the arch, new religious rituals, and the symbols of power, like the fascisa bundle of rods with an axe that would endure for centuries. But the Roman people had a fierce spirit of independence. They grew tired of being ruled by kings, especially the last one, Tarquin the Proud, who was seen as a tyrant. In 509 BC, a revolution erupted. The Romans expelled Tarquin and declared they would never again be ruled by a single man. They established a new form of government, a res publica, a public affair. This was the birth of the Roman Republic. This wasn't a democracy in the modern sense, but a complex system of elected officials, assemblies, and the powerful Senate, which was dominated by the wealthy patrician families. The ordinary citizens, the plebeians, had to fight for centuries to gain their rights. A struggle known as the conflict of the orders. This internal struggle, this constant push and pull between different social classes, actually made Rome stronger. It forged a society that was resilient, adaptable, and deeply patriotic. The Roman citizen, whether patrician or plebeian, was taught that their highest duty was to the state. This devotion, combined with a remarkable military machine, was about to be unleashed on the world. The early republic was a period of constant warfare. Rome wasn't just defending itself anymore, it was expanding. It fought and conquered its neighbors. The Latins, the Samnites, the Etruscans, and the Greek cities. In the south of Italy, each victory brought new territory, new resources, and new manpower. Conquered peoples were often incorporated into the Roman system, sometimes granted partial or full citizenship. This was one of Rome's greatest strengths. Unlike other ancient powers that simply ruled over subjugated peoples, Rome had a unique ability to assimilate them. It created a vast network of allies and citizens, all bound together by loyalty to Rome. By 264 BC, Rome had control over the entire Italian peninsula. It was now a major power in the Mediterranean, but as it looked out from its shores, it saw another great power staring back. Carthage, located in modern-day Tunisia. Carthage was a naval empire that controlled trade across the western Mediterranean. A clash between these two rising giants was inevitable. The resulting conflict, a series of 3 wars known as the Punic Wars, was one of the most epic struggles of the ancient world. It was a fight for survival, a contest that would determine the fate of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War was primarily a naval conflict. Rome, a land-based power, had to build a navy from scratch. And they did, reverse engineering a captured Carthaginian warship and adding their own innovation, the Corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed their superior soldiers to fight on the decks of enemy ships. After more than 20 years of brutal fighting, Rome won, gaining control of Sicily, its first overseas province. But the fight wasn't over. A generation later, Carthage produced one of the greatest military geniuses in history, Hannibal Barca, swearing an oath to his father to forever be an enemy of Rome. Hannibal launched a daring and audacious invasion. He marched his army, complete with war elephants, from Spain, over the Pyrenees, and across the treacherous Alps into Italy. For over a decade, Hannibal rampaged through the Italian countryside, inflicting a series of devastating defeats on the Romans. The most famous was the Battle of Cannae, a tactical masterpiece where Hannibal's smaller army completely encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman force. It was Rome's darkest hour. Any other state would have collapsed, would have sued for peace. This is where the Roman character, forged in centuries of struggle, truly showed itself. They refused to give up. They adopted a new strategy, the Fabian strategy, named after the dictator Fabius Maximus. They avoided direct battle with Hannibal, instead shadowing his army, harassing his supply lines, and slowly wearing him down. It was a war of attrition. While Hannibal was trapped in Italy, a brilliant young Roman general, Scipio took the fight to Carthage's home turf, in Spain and then Africa. This forced Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend the city. Finally, at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Scipio faced Hannibal. Using Hannibal's own tactics against him, Scipio decisively defeated the Carthaginian army. Rome had won. The defeat of Hannibal marked a turning point. Rome was now the undisputed master of the western Mediterranean. It went on to conquer Greece, Macedon, and much of the Near East. The small settlement on the Seven Hills was now the center of a vast, multicultural empire. Its legions were invincible. Its engineering was unparalleled, and its law was a standard of the civilized world. The wealth of the conquered world poured into the city. But this incredible success came at a price. The expansion that made Rome rich also created deep social and political problems. The Republic, a form of government designed for a small city-state, began to buckle under the strain of running a global empire. The Age of Civil War, a time of giants like Julius Caesar, and the dramatic violent death of the Republic, and the birth of the Roman Empire under its first emperor Augustus. From its humble beginnings on the banks of the Tiber, Rome's journey was one of grit, innovation, and relentless ambition. It was a story built on stone, cemented by law, and expanded by the sword. The foundations were now set for a civilization that would shape the course of Western history for 1,000 years. Have you ever heard this saying? Wherever the empire reached, Rome rebuilt the world in its own image. It's a powerful statement, and when you look at the evidence, it's astonishingly true. From the misty frontiers of Britain to the sun-scorched landscapes of North Africa, from the shores of Spain to the deserts of Syria, the Romans didn't just conquer. They built cities that were unmistakably Roman, stamping their identity onto the very land they occupied. What did it mean to build a city like a Roman? It meant order. It meant logic. It meant a blueprint for civilization that could be replicated almost anywhere. At the heart of this blueprint was the grid plan. Most Roman cities were laid out with 2 main streets intersecting at a right angle. The Cardo, running north-south, and the Decumanus, running east. This simple, elegant design divided the city into neat rectangular blocks called insulae. It wasn't just about looking tidy. This structure was incredibly practical. It made navigation easy, organized public and private spaces, and allowed for efficient expansion. You could be a legionary transferred from Germany to Egypt, and upon arriving in a new city, you'd instinctively understand its layout. It was a familiar piece of home, no matter how far you were. At the intersection of the Cardo and Decumanus, you would find the heart of the city. The Forum. The Forum was more than just a public square. It was the vibrant center of Roman life. This is where politics, commerce, justice, and religion all converged. Imagine standing in the Forum of a city like Pompeii. You'd be surrounded by magnificent structures. On one side, the Basilica, a massive public building that served as a courthouse and a place for business deals. Nearby, you'd see temples dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva the Capitoline Triadis. There would be markets, or mycella, bustling with merchants selling everything from fresh fish to exotic spices. The air would be filled with the sounds of senators debating, lawyers arguing cases, and citizens gossiping. The Forum was the stage upon which the drama of Roman urban life unfolded every single day. But a city needs more than just streets and public squares. It needs water. And this is where one of Rome's most famous innovations comes into play. The aqueduct. The Romans were masters of hydraulic engineering. They built monumental channels, often stretching for dozens of miles, to bring fresh, clean water from distant springs into their cities. These weren't just simple ditches. They were marvels of engineering, built with a precise, gentle gradient that allowed gravity to do all the work. Structures like the Pont du Gard in France are breathtaking testaments to this skill, with their towering arches striding across valleys. Once the water reached the city, it didn't just stop. It was distributed through a complex network of lead pipes to public fountains, bathhouses, and the homes of the wealthy. This constant supply of fresh water was a gift. It improved public health, sanitation, and quality of life, making Roman cities far more advanced than any that had come before. And what did the Romans do with all that water? Well, a lot of it went to one of their most beloved institutions, the public baths. Bathhouses were not just places to get clean. They were massive social hubs, the equivalent of our community centers, gyms, and spas all rolled into one. A typical visit to the baths was a ritual. You'd start in the palestra, an open-air courtyard for exercise. Then you'd move through a series of rooms with different temperatures. The tepidarium, a warm room to ease you in. The caldarium, a hot steamy room like a sauna. And finally, the frigidarium, a cold plunge pool to close your pores and invigorate you. But it wasn't all about bathing. The bath complexes also included libraries, lecture halls, gardens, and food stalls. People from all social classes could mingle, network, and relax. For a small entry fee, any Roman citizen could enjoy a level of luxury that was previously unimaginable for the common person. The baths of Caracalla or Diocletian in Rome were colossal, capable of holding thousands of people at once. Of course, no discussion of Roman cities is complete without mentioning their entertainment venues. The Romans loved their spectacles, and they built incredible structures to house them. The most famous is, without a doubt, the amphitheater, epitomized by the Colosseum in Rome. These massive oval arenas were designed for gladiatorial contests, animal hunts, and even mock naval battles. Their tiered seating, known as the cavea, could hold tens of thousands of spectators, all with a clear view of the action below. The design was so efficient that a full amphitheater could be emptied in just a few minutes through a system of entrances and exits called vomitoria. But it wasn't just about gladiators. For more refined entertainment, there was the theater, modeled on Greek designs but typically built on level ground, using arches and concrete. Roman theaters hosted plays, pantomimes, and musical performances. Then there was the circus, a long, narrow track for chariot racing, the most popular sport in the Roman world. The Circus Maximus in Rome could supposedly hold over 150,000 people, all screaming for their favorite racing team. What made all of this possible was the Roman mastery of materials and construction techniques. They didn't invent the arch, but they perfected it. They used arches to build everything from aqueducts and bridges to the foundations of their amphitheaters. But their real secret weapon was concrete. Roman concrete, or opus caementicium, was a revolutionary material. A mixture of lime, mortars, volcanic ash, called pozzolana, and rubble. It was cheaper and more versatile than stone. It could be poured into molds to create complex shapes like domes and vaults, which were impossible with traditional masonry. The magnificent dome of the Pantheon in Rome, still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome after almost 2,000 years, is the ultimate testament to the genius of Roman engineering. This innovation allowed them to build bigger, faster, and stronger than anyone before. Let's look at some examples of this Roman blueprint in action. Far from Rome itself, travel to Leptis Magna in modern-day Libya. Here, you'll find a stunningly well-preserved Roman city, complete with a grand forum, a basilica, an amphitheater, and a massive bath complex, all funded by its most famous son, the Emperor Septimius Severus. Or go to Timgad in Algeria, founded by Emperor Trajan as a retirement colony for legionaries. It's a perfect example of the grid plan. From the air, it looks like a perfectly drawn chessboard. Its Cardo and Decumanus still clearly visible. Head north to Britain, to the city of Bath. The Romans found natural hot springs there and built one of the finest public bathing complexes outside of Rome, a sight so spectacular it gave the modern city its name, from Ephesus in Turkey to Garrosh in Jordan. The story is the same. Roman arches, Roman columns, and Roman order. This architectural and urban uniformity was a powerful tool of empire. It was a form of cultural propaganda. Building a city in the Roman style was a visible, permanent declaration of Roman power and permanence. It showed conquered peoples the benefits of Roman rule. Clean water, public order, entertainment, and a share in a sophisticated urban lifestyle. It helped to integrate diverse populations into a single Roman identity, a process we call a Gallic chieftain, or a British noble, upon seeing the grandeur of a new basilica or the luxury of a public bath, would be implicitly encouraged to adopt Roman ways. They would see that the path to power and prestige was through embracing Roman culture, not resisting it. The cities of stone were not just practical places to live. They were instruments of empire, designed to AOR inspire and assimilate. Today, the ruins of these cities are scattered across 3 continents, silent witnesses to a bygone era. Yet they are not entirely silent. They speak to us of ambition, of engineering prowess, and of a vision for a unified, civilized world. When you walk down a street in Pompeii, stand in the center of the Colosseum, or marvel at the Ponte du Gard, you are connecting with a legacy that has profoundly shaped our own world. Our modern cities, with their grids, public squares, and water systems, owe a debt to their Roman predecessors. The Roman Empire may have fallen, but its cities of stone endure, reminding us that with planning, ingenuity, and a bold vision, it's possible to build a world in your own image. Behind the magnificent marble and gleaming bronze, the Roman Empire ran like a well-oiled machine. It wasn't just about legions and emperors. It was a complex system of trade, agriculture, and finance that powered one of the greatest civilizations in history. Let's pull back the curtain and look at the hidden machinery that made Rome tick. Imagine a vast network of roads, not just for armies, but for commerce. These were the arteries of the empire, pumping goods from one corner to another. A merchant in Rome could enjoy wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, and spices from the distant east. This wasn't just luxury, it was the lifeblood of the economy. The Mediterranean Sea, what the Romans called Mare Nostrum, or RC, was a giant grain ships, some carrying over 1,000 tons of wheat, sailed constantly from the fertile fields of Egypt and North Africa to feed the ever-growing population of Rome itself. The city of Rome was a hungry beast, with over 1 million mouths to feed. Without this steady stream of grain, the capital would have starved, and the empire would have crumbled. This massive logistical operation, known as the Annona, was a state-run enterprise, a testament to Roman organizational genius. But it wasn't just about food. The empire's economy was incredibly diverse. Think about the sheer scale of production. Spain was famous for its silver mines, which supplied the raw material for the empire's currency. Coins minted with the emperor's face weren't just money, they were propaganda, spreading his image and authority to the furthest provinces. These standardized coins, like the denarius, made trade across vast distances seamless. A soldier on Hadrian's Wall in Britain could be paid with a coin mined in Spain and use it to buy pottery made in Gaul. This economic integration created a massive single market that fostered prosperity and stability for centuries. Britain exported lead and wool, while Syria produced exquisite glass. The interconnectedness was staggering. Now, let's talk about agriculture, the true foundation of the Roman world. The vast majority of the population, perhaps over 80%, worked the land. The empire was dotted with large estates called latifundia, which were essentially ancient agribusiness. They used organized labor, often slaves, to produce cash crops like olives and grapes on an industrial scale. But it wasn't just large estates. Small-scale farmers were the backbone of provincial life, tilling their plots to feed their families and sell the surplus at local markets. The Romans were also master engineers when it came to farming. They built incredible aqueducts, not just for cities, but for irrigating fields, turning arid landscapes into productive farmland. They understood crop rotation, fertilization, and how to get the most out of their land. This agricultural surplus is what freed up others to be soldiers, craftsmen, administrators, and artists. It was the fuel for the entire imperial engine. The population density of the Roman Empire was also remarkable for the ancient world. Cities like Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch were bustling metropolises, magnets for people seeking opportunity. This urbanization was made possible by the very systems we've been discussing. Efficient food supply, a robust economy, and incredible infrastructure. The Romans built sewers, public baths, and apartment blocks, called insulae, to manage these dense, urban populations. Life in these cities was vibrant and complex, a far cry from the rural existence of most of humanity at the time. So, when we look at the ruins of the Colosseum or a towering aqueduct, remember what's unseen. Remember the ships braving the Mediterranean, the miners deep in Spanish mountains, the farmers toiling under the Egyptian sun, and the merchants haggling in a bustling forum. This was the hidden machinery of Rome, an intricate, interconnected system of logistics, finance, and labor that supported the grandeur of the emperors and the might of the legions. It was this machine, running silently in the background, that allowed the Roman Empire to endure for so long and leave such a profound legacy on our world. It shows us that behind every great power, there is a complex engine of ordinary people and extraordinary systems working together. Have you ever wondered how a tiny settlement of huts transformed into the most powerful empire the world had ever seen? Before Rome ruled the world, it was just a collection of mud and wattle huts scattered across 7 hills, overlooking a lazy river. Our journey starts around the 8th century BC, on the banks of the Tiber River, in what is now Italy. The land was fertile, the hills offered natural defense, and the river provided a vital route to the sea. It was the perfect spot for a city to be born. They established religious customs, created the first Senate, a council of elders from prominent families, and organized the army. But Rome wasn't alone in the region. To the north lived a highly advanced and mysterious civilization. The Etruscans were masters of engineering, art, and trade. Their influence on early Rome was immense. They taught the Romans how to build with stone, how to construct arches and drainage systems like the Great Sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, which is still in use today. Etruscan customs, religious rituals, and even symbols of power, like the facisa bundle of rods, with an axe, were adopted by the Romans. This period of Etruscan dominance came to a dramatic end with the reign of the last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. He was a tyrant, ruling with fear and ignoring the Senate. The final straw came in 509 BC, after a horrific crime committed by his son. The Roman nobility, led by a man named Lucius Junius Brutus, had had enough. They rose up, expelled Tarquin and his family from the city, and swore an oath that no king would ever rule Rome again. This event was a turning point. It marked the death of the monarchy and the birth of something entirely new, something that would change the course of history. The Roman Republic. The word republic comes from the Latin res publica, which means the public thing or the public affair. Idea was that power would no longer be in the hands of a single man, but would be shared among its citizens. In place of a king, the Romans elected consuls each year. These men held supreme power, but their authority was limited. They could only serve for 1 year, and each consul had the power to veto the other's decisions. A brilliant system of checks and balances, designed to prevent any one individual from becoming too powerful. The Senate, once just an advisory council to the king, now became the central governing body of the Republic. Its members the patricians, or the aristocratic class, forming their positions for life. But this new republic was far from a perfect democracy. For the first few centuries, a deep social and political struggle raged within the city. This was the conflict of the orders, a clash between the patricians and the plebeians. The plebeians were the common people of Rome, the farmers, merchants, and artisans. They could vote, but they couldn't hold the most important political or religious offices. They were often in debt to the patricians and faced harsh laws. Feeling powerless and exploited, the plebeians found a unique and powerful weapon. On several occasions, they literally walked out of the city en masse, refusing to work, to farm, or to fight in the army until their demands were met. Without the plebeians, Rome was paralyzed. The patricians were forced to compromise. Through these struggles, the plebeians gradually won more rights. One of their first major victories was the creation of the law of the 12 tables around 450 BC. This was Rome's first written code of law, inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed in the Forum for all to see. For the first time, the law was public and consistent, no longer subject to the whims of patrician judges. Later, the plebeians gained their own representatives, the tribunes of the plebs. These officials had the extraordinary power to veto any act of the Senate or the consuls that they felt was harmful to the common people. Over time, plebeians won the right to hold every major office in the state, including the consulship itself. The conflict of the orders was a long and difficult process, but it forged a stronger, more inclusive Roman society. It created a fierce loyalty to the Republic, a sense that every citizen, patrician, or plebeian had a stake in Rome's survival and success, and Rome would need every bit of that loyalty. The early Republic was a dangerous time. The city was constantly at war with its neighbors, the Latins, the Sabines, and the fearsome Gauls from the north who, in 390 BC, actually sacked and burned Rome to the ground. Yet, from these ashes, Rome rose again, more determined than ever. They rebuilt their city, this time with stronger walls. They reorganized their army, transforming it from a simple citizen militia into the disciplined, professional fighting force that would become legendary. The Roman legions. Each legion was a marvel of organization, capable of marching for miles, building fortified camps every night, and executing complex battlefield maneuvers. The Roman soldier, the legionary, was tough, disciplined, and incredibly resilient. Over the next century, legion by legion, Rome systematically conquered the Italian peninsula. They didn't just conquer. They integrated. They granted varying levels of citizenship or ally status to the peoples they defeated, binding them to Rome with a network of treaties, roads, and shared interests. This clever policy turned former enemies into loyal partners in the Roman project. By 264 BC, Rome was the undisputed master of Italy. But now, as it looked out across the Mediterranean Sea, it came face to face with its greatest rival, a mighty maritime empire that would test the Republic to its very limits. Carthage. The stage was set for an epic conflict that would decide the fate of the ancient world. From a humble village to the ruler of Italy, Rome's early history is a story of myth, revolution, struggle, and relentless ambition. It was in these first 500 years that the foundations of its future greatness were laid. When you picture a Roman legionary, what comes to mind? A disciplined soldier, shield locked, marching into battle. The Roman legions were more than just soldiers. They were the architects of control, the very sinews that bound a vast and sprawling empire together for centuries. Their true power wasn't just in the sword, but in the shovel, the survey tool, and the rulebook. How do you govern an empire that stretches from the misty hills of Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia? You can't just conquer a place and leave. You have to hold it, integrate it, and make it Roman. This is where the legion's real work began. They were the ultimate multi-tool of imperial administration. Let's start with their structure. The legion was a masterpiece of organization. Every man had a place, a role, and a clear chain of command. From the legionary in his contubonium, a 10th group of 8 men who lived and fought together, all the way up to the legatus, the legion's commander. It was a system built on unbreakable discipline and unit cohesion. This wasn't a disorganized rabble, it was a finely tuned machine. This discipline, drilled into them day after day, wasn't just for the battlefield. It was for every task they were given. When a centurion gave an order, whether it was to charge the enemy or dig a ditch, it was followed without question. This unwavering discipline was the bedrock of their success in both war and peace. And peace, ironically, was where the legions did some of their most important work. After the fighting was done, the legionaries didn't just sit in their barracks. They became engineers, builders, and policemen. The famous Roman roads, those incredibly straight, durable highways that crisscrossed the empire, were largely built by legionary hands. A message or a cohort could travel from Rome to the outer provinces faster than ever before. This network, built by the legions, was the physical manifestation of Roman control, tying the empire together. But they didn't stop at roads. Legionaries built bridges, aqueducts to bring fresh water to new cities, and entire forts that grew into towns. When you look at the layout of many European cities today, like Cologne in Germany or York in England, you can still see the grid-like pattern of the original Roman military camp they grew from. The soldiers were literally laying the foundations for future civilizations. They were transplanting the Roman way of life, brick by brick, into conquered lands. Then there were the frontiers. The edges of the empire were not just lines on a map. They were complex, dynamic zones that had to be managed. This is where the legions truly became guardians. Take Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, one of the most famous examples. This wasn't just a wall to keep people out. It was a massive, 73-mile-long instrument of control. Legionaries patrolled its length, manned the mile castles and forts, and controlled who and what crossed the border. It was a customs checkpoint, a deterrent, and a powerful symbol of Roman might, all in one. It told the world, this far and no further. Here, Roman order begins. Similar systems existed along the Rhine and Danube rivers in Europe and across the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East. The Limes Germanicus, for example, was a chain of forts, walls, and watchtowers stretching for hundreds of miles. Manning these frontiers wasn't just about waiting for an attack. It was about managing trade, gathering intelligence, and projecting power. They were the architects of control, using discipline and engineering just as effectively as they used their swords. They didn't just win wars, they built a world. And the echoes of their work, in the roads we still walk on and the cities we live in, can be felt to this very day. Empires fall, but ideas endure forever. When we think of the Roman Empire, we often picture epic battles, powerful emperors, and magnificent ruins. And while the Western Roman Empire officially fell over 1,500 years ago, its influence is so deeply woven into our modern world that we often don't even notice it. It's in the languages we speak, the laws that govern us, the buildings we admire, and even the roads we travel on. So, how did a fallen empire manage to shape the future so profoundly? Today, we're going to unravel the incredible and enduring legacy of Rome. Let's start with something fundamental: the law. If you've ever heard the phrase, innocent until proven guilty, you're hearing an echo of Roman legal principles. The Romans were pioneers in developing a sophisticated legal system. Their 12 tables, created early in the Republic, were one of the first attempts to create a written code of laws that applied to all citizens. Over centuries, this evolved into a massive body of jurisprudence, emphasizing concepts like evidence, witness testimony, and the idea that the law should be based on reason and justice, not the whims of a ruler. This body of work, later codified by Emperor Justinian as the corpus juris became the foundation for the civil law systems used in most of continental Europe, Latin America, and many other parts of the world. So, the very structure of many modern legal systems owes a massive debt to Roman jurists who lived millennia ago. Now, let's talk language. Have you ever wondered why Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian sound so similar? The answer is Latin, the language of the Romans. As the empire expanded, Latin spread across Europe and North Africa, mixing with local dialects to create what we now call the Romance languages. But its influence doesn't stop there. Even English, a Germanic language, is packed with Latin. It's estimated that over 60% of English words have Latin or Greek roots, especially in fields like science, medicine, and law. Think of words like video, from the Latin IC, or versus, meaning against. Latin was the language of scholarship, religion, and diplomacy for centuries after Rome's fall. It is a so-called dead language that is very much alive in the vocabulary we use every single day. Of course, you can't talk about Rome without talking about architecture and engineering. The Romans were master builders, and their innovations are still standing today. The arch, the vault, and the dome, these were the building blocks of their architectural genius. They allowed the Romans to construct massive, durable structures like the Colosseum, a marvel of engineering that could hold over 50,000 spectators. And what about the aqueducts? These incredible channels, some stretching for dozens of miles, brought fresh water to cities, a feat of hydraulic engineering that was unrivaled for 1,000 years. Modern stadiums still use the Roman vomitorium design for efficient crowd control, and the dome, perfected in the Pantheon with its famous oculus, has inspired countless buildings, from St. Peter's Basilica to the US Capitol. And how did the Romans manage to control such a vast territory? A big part of the answer lies beneath our feet. Roads. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just a metaphor. The Romans built over 50,000 miles of high-quality paved roads, connecting the farthest corners of their empire. These weren't just dirt tracks. They were sophisticated, multi-layered constructions designed for speed, durability, and drainage. This network was the circulatory system of the empire, allowing legions to march quickly, administrators to travel, and trade to flourish. Many of these ancient routes formed the basis of modern highways in Europe and the Middle East. They literally laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we live in today. The Roman Empire also played a pivotal, though complex, role in the spread of one of the world's major religions, Christianity. Initially, Christians were a persecuted minority within the empire, but in the 4th century, a dramatic shift occurred. Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, and with the Edict of Milan, he granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. Later, it became the official state religion. The empire's vast network of roads and its common languages, Latin and Greek, became highways for missionaries, allowing the faith to spread from a small sect in Judea to a dominant force across Europe. The organizational structure of the early Catholic Church even mirrored the administrative divisions of the Roman Empire. So the fall of the empire in the West actually left the Church as one of the most powerful and unifying institutions in Europe for the next 1,000 years. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Europe entered a period often called the Dark Ages. But the ideas of Rome were never truly lost. They were preserved in monasteries, in the Byzantine Empire in the East, and in the memory of a lost golden age. And then, something extraordinary happened. The Renaissance, beginning in Italy in the 14th century, this rebirth was a rediscovery of classical Roman and Greek art, literature, philosophy, and science. Artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci studied Roman sculptures to understand human anatomy. Architects like Brunelleschi studied the Pantheon to figure out how to build the magnificent dome of the Florence Cathedral. Scholars hunted for lost Latin texts, rediscovering the works of Cicero, Virgil, and Seneca. The Renaissance was, in many ways, Europe's attempt to reconnect with its Roman past and use its wisdom to build a new future. So, how does this all connect to us, right here, right now? Roman influence is everywhere. The very idea of a republic, a government of elected officials, is a concept honed in Rome. The senates and capitol buildings in many countries, including the United States, are direct nods to Roman institutions and architecture. Our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, is a minor modification of the Julian calendar, introduced by none other than Julius Caesar. Even the names of our months, like August for Emperor Augustus, come from Rome. From the letters of our alphabet to the concrete used in our buildings, we are surrounded by the ghosts of Rome. The story of the Roman Empire isn't just a story of conquest and collapse. It's a powerful lesson in how ideas, innovations, and culture can outlive the people who created them. Rome provided a blueprint for law, language, government, and engineering that has been adapted and built upon for millennia. The empire itself may be long gone, its legions turned to dust and its palaces to ruins, but its legacy is immortal. It's an idea, and as we said at the beginning, ideas endure forever. Have you ever heard the saying, "Power without limits breeds madness"? It sounds like something out of a movie, but for ancient Rome, it was a terrifying reality. Picture this: the Roman Empire, at its absolute peak, a civilization that gave us aqueducts, roads, and laws we still reference today. But behind this gleaming facade, a shadow was growing, a rot that started right at the very top. This wasn't just a few bad decisions. This was a descent into chaos led by emperors whose names are now legendary for all the wrong reasons. Take Caligula. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a spectacle of insanity. He allegedly tried to make his favorite horse and a consul the highest political office in Rome. He built a 2-mile floating bridge across the Bay of Naples just to ride his horse back and forth, simply to prove a soothsayer wrong. And let's not forget Domitian. He ruled with an iron fist, creating a climate of fear and suspicion that permeated every corner of Rome. He demanded to be addressed as Dominus Etus, which means Lord and God. His paranoia led to a reign of terror, with spies everywhere and treason trials becoming a daily occurrence. He executed senators on flimsy charges, confiscated their wealth, and ruled not through respect, but through sheer terror. These emperors weren't just flawed leaders, they were symptoms of a deeper disease. The old virtues of duty, honor, and public service were being replaced by greed, self-indulgence, and a lust for brutal entertainment in the Colosseum. The political system was in chaos, with the line of succession often decided by murder and conspiracy. The madness at the top was a sign that the foundations of this mighty empire were beginning to crack. But the story doesn't end with a few crazy emperors. The real unraveling was far more complex. An empire too vast to hold began to crumble from within. Imagine trying to manage a territory that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia with ancient technology. Communication was slow, and defending thousands of miles of borders was a logistical nightmare. This immense size became a crippling weakness. Amidst this chaos, a new force was rising. Christianity. At first, it was a small, persecuted sect, but its message of hope, equality, and an afterlife resonated with many people who felt abandoned by the old Roman gods and the failing state. Despite brutal persecutions, the faith spread like wildfire. By the 4th century, it was so influential that Emperor Constantine converted, making Christianity the favored religion of the empire. This was a monumental shift. It changed Roman culture forever, but it also created new divisions. Debates over religious doctrine caused deep rifts, and the old pagan traditions were gradually dismantled. The very identity of what it meant to be Roman was changing. Faced with an empire that was simply too big and chaotic to manage, Emperor Diocletian made a radical decision. He split it in two. He created a Western Roman Empire and an Eastern Roman Empire, each with its own emperor. The idea was to make it more manageable, but in the long run, it only deepened the divide. The East, centered in the wealthy city of Constantinople, thrived. It was more urban, had a stronger economy, and was easier to defend. The West, with its capital in Rome and later Ravenna, was more rural, poorer, and faced constant pressure on its long frontiers. The two halves began to drift apart, speaking different languages: Latin in the West, Greek in the East End, developing their own distinct cultures. The final act began as waves of Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, and Franks were pushed towards Roman borders by the Huns. of fierce nomadic people from Central Asia. These weren't just raids anymore. They were mass migrations of entire peoples looking for new homes. The overstretched and broke Western Roman army couldn't hold them back. In the year 10 AD, the unthinkable happened. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, breached the walls of Rome and sacked the city. For 3 days, the Eternal City, which hadn't been captured by a foreign enemy in 800 years, was plundered. The psychological shock was immense. It was a message to the world. Rome was no longer invincible. Over the next few decades, the Western Empire disintegrated. Provinces fell away. Vandals conquered North Africa's breadbasket of Rome, and Germanic warlords carved out their own kingdoms from what was once Roman territory. The final blow came in 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. Odoacer didn't even bother to name himself emperor. He just sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, signaling that the Western Roman Empire was no more. The fall of Rome wasn't a single event, but a slow, painful process of decline that spanned centuries. It was a perfect storm of political corruption, economic collapse, internal division, and external pressures. It's a powerful lesson from history that still echoes today. Born into an ancient patrician family that had fallen on hard times, Caesar's ambition was forged in the crucible of Roman politics, a dangerous game of shifting alliances and brutal power struggles. From his youth, he displayed a sharp intellect, a charismatic presence, and an unyielding will to restore his family's name and influence. But no one, perhaps not even Caesar himself, could have predicted the heights he would reach, or the profound and permanent mark he would leave on the world. This is the story of his ascent, his conquests, and his ultimate fall, a story that begins not in the marble halls of Rome, but in the wild, untamed lands to the north. The year is 58 BC. Caesar, now a consul and a prominent figure in Rome, secures the governorship of Gaul. For many, this was a political backwater, a place to be forgotten. But for Caesar, it was an opportunity. One man's vision would soon ignite a decade of war. He arrived to find a region in chaos, with Celtic and Germanic tribes vying for dominance, their migrations threatening Roman territory. Caesar saw not just a threat, but a chance to win military glory, immense wealth, and the unwavering loyalty of a professional army, the three keys to ultimate power in Rome. His campaigns in Gaul were not just a series of battles. They were a masterclass in military strategy, engineering, and psychological warfare. He built bridges in record time, constructed elaborate siege works, and drove his legions to feats of endurance that seemed impossible. Caesar's strategy in Gaul was relentless and brilliant. He played tribes against one another, forming alliances of convenience, only to break them when it suited his purpose. He moved his legions with astonishing speed, appearing where he was least expected, and striking with decisive force. The battle against the Helvetii, the campaign against the Belgae, the daring invasions of Britain, each victory added to his legend. But his most famous and defining struggle came against a united Gallic resistance, led by the charismatic chieftain. At the siege of Alesia, Caesar found himself in an incredible predicament. His army was besieging the Gallic fortress, while simultaneously being besieged by a massive Gallic relief army. It was a battle against impossible odds. Yet, through sheer genius and the discipline of his legions, Caesar constructed two lines of fortifications, one facing inward to trap Vercingetorix, and one facing outward to repel the relief force. In a titanic struggle, he defeated both, securing Gaul for Rome and cementing his reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders. After 8 years of brutal warfare, Gaul was conquered. But while Caesar was winning glory abroad, his enemies in Rome were plotting his downfall. The political alliance that had supported him, the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, had crumbled. With Crassus dead and Pompey now aligned with the conservative senators, Caesar was declared an enemy of the state. He was ordered to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, where he would face prosecution and certain political ruin. One man, standing at the edge of a small river, would now make a decision that would plunge the world into civil war. The river was the Rubicon, the border between his province and Italy. To cross it with his army was an act of treason, an open declaration of war against the Senate and his former ally, Pompey. On that fateful night in 49 BC were the words Alia Iacta est the dies. Caesar led his 13th legion across the river. There was no turning back. The civil war was swift and decisive. Caesar's lightning march down the Italian peninsula caught Pompey and the Senate completely off guard. They fled Italy, abandoning the treasury and their forces, choosing to regroup in the east. Caesar, ever the master of momentum, secured Rome and then pursued his enemies across the Mediterranean. He fought campaigns in Spain, Greece, Egypt, and North Africa. The decisive battle came at Pharsalos in Greece, where Caesar's veteran legions, though outnumbered, shattered Pompey's army. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was assassinated on the order of the young king, Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, arriving shortly after, was presented with Pompey's head. It is said that he wept, not in triumph, but for the tragic end of a great Roman and a former friend. The war continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Caesar was the undisputed master of the Roman world. With all his rivals defeated, Caesar returned to Rome not as a conqueror, but as a reformer. He embarked on an ambitious program of social and governmental reforms. He revised the calendar, creating the Julian calendar that, with minor adjustments, we still use today. He initiated massive public works projects, providing jobs for the unemployed. He granted Roman citizenship to people in the provinces and reformed the corrupt system of tax collection. He planned to codify Roman law and establish public libraries. For his efforts, the Senate showered him with honors, eventually proclaiming him dictator, perpetual dictator for life. This move, however, was a step too far. For a society that had overthrown its kings centuries earlier and cherished the ideals of the Republic, the concept of a king in all but name was intolerable. One man's power had grown too great, and the whispers of conspiracy began to echo in the halls of the Senate. The daggers were being sharpened. A group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators, began to plot against him. Led by Gaius Cassius, Longinus, and Marcus Junius, Brutus Aman Caesar had pardoned and treated like a Sunday. Believed they were acting to save the Republic from tyranny. They saw Caesar's ambition as a threat to Roman liberty itself. They failed to see that the Republic was already broken. Imagine Rome in 509 BC, the king is gone, and in his place, a complex new system is born. At the very top, you have the Senate. Think of it as the ultimate council of elders, a chamber filled with the city's most influential and wealthy men. These were the descendants of Rome's founding families, the blue bloods of their day. They held their positions for life, steering the ship of state with a steady, experienced hand. The Senate controlled the treasury, foreign policy, and had immense influence. They weren't elected in the way we think of today. They were the established power, the permanent government. But the Senate couldn't rule alone. To replace the king's executive power, the Romans created a brilliant and daring institution, the consuls. Every year, the people elected the consuls to serve as joint heads of state. Why, too? It was a genius system of checks and balances. Each consul could veto the other's decision, preventing any one man from accumulating too much power. They commanded the armies, presided over the Senate, and acted as the chief magistrates of the city. But their power was temporary. Just 1 year. After their term, they were accountable for their actions. It was a powerful message. Serve the Republic, but remember, you are not above it. This new system looked great on paper. Power was shared, leaders were elected, but there was a massive fault line running right through Roman society. On one side, you had the patricians, the wealthy landowners, the senators, the consuls, and on the other, you had everyone else, the plebeians. The plebs were the common people, the farmers, the merchants, the artisans, the soldiers. They were the backbone of Rome, the ones who worked the fields and fought the wars. Yet, in the early Republic, they had virtually no political power. The laws were unwritten, interpreted and enforced by patrician magistrates, often to their own benefit. The plebs could be drafted into the army, fall into debt, and even be sold into slavery, all while the patrician elite grew richer and more powerful. This wasn't sustainable. You can't build a republic on the backs of an oppressed majority. The plebeians knew it. They had leverage, and they weren't afraid to use it. Their ultimate weapon, secession, not leaving Rome entirely, but a mass strike. They would march out of the city, set up camp on a nearby hill, and refuse to work, trade, or fight until their demands were met. Imagine the chaos. The shops are closed, the fields are empty, and the army? Well, there is no army. The patricians, faced with a crippled city and external threats, had no choice but to negotiate. While this internal struggle was reshaping Rome, something else was happening. The city was expanding. Rome wasn't built in a day, and its empire wasn't either. It started small, with wars against its immediate neighbors in Italy, the Latins, the Etruscans. The Roman military machine was unlike any other. The legion, a highly organized and disciplined unit of citizen soldiers, was the key. But it wasn't just about winning battles. The Romans were masters of consolidation. When they conquered a territory, they didn't just plunder it and leave. They built roads, establishing lines of communication and supply. The famous Appian Way is a testament to this. A military road that became a commercial artery. They founded colonies, settling Roman citizens in strategic locations, spreading Roman language, law, and culture. Their approach to conquered peoples was also incredibly shrewd. Instead of enslaving everyone, they created a tiered system of rights and citizenship. Some communities were granted full Roman citizenship. Others received a lesser form, with private rights, but no right to vote. Others became allies, required to provide troops for the Roman army but otherwise left to manage their own affairs. This policy of incorporation, rather than simple subjugation, turned former enemies into partners in the Roman project. It gave them a stake in Rome's success. When invaders like the Greek king Pyrrhus or the legendary Hannibal of Carthage invaded Italy, they expected Rome's allies to desert them, but they didn't. They stood by Rome because Rome's fate had become their own. By the middle of the 3rd century BC, after centuries of internal conflict and external warfare, the Roman Republic had achieved something remarkable. It had transformed from a small, aristocratic city-state into the master of the entire Italian peninsula. It had developed a unique and resilient political system that, for a time, balanced the interests of the elite and the common people. The promise made after the fall of the kings, that power would be a public affair, had been tested by social strife and foreign invasion, and it had endured. The Republic was now a formidable power, standing on the cusp of even greater things. Its legions were battle-hardened, its political system was robust, and its ambition was growing. The stage was set for Rome to look beyond Italy, across the Mediterranean Sea, to a rival power that would test the Republic like never before. Carthage, the greatest wars of antiquity, were about to begin, and the Roman Republic, forged in the fire of conflict, was ready. The story of its struggle for power was far from over, but it had laid the foundation for an empire that would change the course of human history. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey through Roman history fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments which part of Rome's fall you find most compelling. See you in the next video.